So, my name is Marek Kowalski, and I am from our Milton campus. I served there for a term as our campus pastor, and just recently I've transitioned over into a role I was doing before, but with a little more focus. Now I'm doing a lot of our communications and media stuff, and still obviously speaking from time to time and doing some other pastoral duties. So this morning, I don't know about you guys, but it's been a bit of a week for me. The other thing that I have going on is that I have my own business, and it's been like a really crazy time. I'm swamped. I'm working a ton of hours right now. Plus I have 3 kids, and so there's that whole dynamic and wife, and so the family life is happening. We actually have all 3 kids are going through birthdays right now. So yesterday we had a combined birthday party that consisted of 16 little girls between kindergarten and grade 3. So that was interesting. I'm not sleeping that well with all this going on. I'm struggling with the work-life balance, and I'm conscious of the fact that I could drift spiritually. That's what happens when we get overwhelmed like this, right? Oh, and we're still in the grips of winter, so there's that whole thing too, right? It's depressing. It's awful. But amidst all of this, I had a few really amazing bright spots throughout my week that really started to shift my perspective. I had the privilege to interview a few families in our church, and they are some of the most interesting, resilient, humble, and even joyful families I think I've met and that we have in our midst. So it's pretty cool. And yet, at the same time, these are families who are dealing with challenges that most of us probably couldn't even imagine. But yet, in spite of all their circumstances, they are strong, they are centered, they're incredibly faithful, and I really do look up to them, and I want to share a little bit of their stories with you this morning. So welcome to week 4 of a series that we're calling Recalculating, Detours in the Family Journey. The whole premise of this series is to talk about family, but usually when we talk about family in the church or even in other settings, often we're coming at it from that perspective of the quote-unquote ideal nuclear family, right? We're talking about husband and wife and a few happy, healthy kids, biological children. But that's not always helpful when so many of our families don't actually resemble that. So we're hoping that in this 6-part series, we'll be able to speak to some of the different dynamics that we have in our church and in our neighborhoods. So far, if you've been tracking along the series, you've heard about families in which husband and wife maybe aren't of the same spiritual background or have the same faith. We've looked at blended families. Last week you heard about families who have been impacted by divorce or single parenthood. And so this morning I'm actually going to be talking to you about families who are dealing with children with special needs or disabilities. And I have a very limited experience in this area, I'll say up front. My oldest son has some very mild learning disabilities that we've been in the process of sort of figuring out. But we have friends within the church and outside the church who I've spent a lot of time with and talked about these issues with, who are dealing with OCD, so obsessive compulsive disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, ADHD, autism, these sorts of things. But what I did for this series is I really wanted to get a better and more intimate understanding of this topic. So what I did is I sat down with 4 families from Renew Church who have children who have special needs or some sort of disability. 3 of the 4 families I met with actually have children who are on the autism spectrum. And 2 of those families, their children are nonverbal. They have other developmental and genetic issues, and so they don't communicate like the rest of us. And then the 4th family I met with, they have a child who has more of a medical disorder. So this is not something, cognitive or behavioral, but a physical impairment. She has a bone disease, a very rare bone disease. And it causes pressure on the brain, which can lead to things like hearing impairment or even deafness, paralysis in parts of the body, particularly in the face, which can affect physical appearance. And so the family has had to endure numerous surgeries. Without these surgeries, this could lead to blindness, deafness, or even death. This is a potentially fatal disease. Now, of course, on this topic, this is so huge, right? This is such a huge topic. I could never address every kind of disorder or disability that people are facing. This affects behavior, emotion, mental health, physical health, all of these things, but at least you know the families I met with, and we're going to kind of approach it from their side of things, because I think the best thing I can do for you today is give you a very realistic glimpse of what they deal with. And so a lot of what I share is not from me, it's actually directly from them. So let's just start by kind of setting the scene. If you are parents or you aspire to be a parent, you probably know or can imagine that experience of pregnancy, and you're about to have a baby. It's one of life's most exciting experiences. I remember all 3 kids, going through that. It almost feels surreal. Like, is this really happening? I'm about to be a dad. I'm going to have a little human life to care for, and I'm going to get to know this child and see them grow and develop into their own person and discover who God has created them to be. And it's a lot of responsibility, but a lot of excitement. And of course, underneath all that excitement, though, as you're entering into this, there's that level of fear. With every ultrasound, every doctor's appointment, every milestone that needs to be met in childhood, there's that fear of, well, what if something were to happen? What if my child is not healthy? What if something goes wrong? We've all probably felt that if you're in a family, if you have kids, or you expect to have kids. But now imagine that fear, probably one of our worst fears, actually coming true. Something's wrong. Maybe your child is late in achieving a certain developmental milestone, like walking, talking, that sort of thing. Maybe there's some sort of episode that takes place. Maybe a motor function fails for some reason and you don't know why, or they go through some kind of illness, or something like a seizure occurs. Now you have to go through all the stress and uncertainty that comes with the assessment and the diagnosis, of going through tests and procedures, of waiting and not knowing what's going on. Wondering if this is just going to be like a little temporary blip in your family journey, or if this is going to detour you permanently, if this is going to take you down a completely different path. Now, the families I met with have been through this. They've been through these range of emotions that go with diagnosis. And so some of the things they explained to me, of course, there's the big question, why? Why me? Why my child? Why would God do this? You might expect them to be angry, and I'm sure there's parents who are angry, but the ones I spoke with didn't express a lot of that. One parent said, it's not so much anger as it is sadness. Another said, it's a hard pill to swallow. No one wants to know something is wrong with your child. Parents described feeling completely overwhelmed by diagnosis, of not knowing how to process it or how to proceed, what to do. Some even talked about feelings of guilt and shame and self-blame, like, is it my fault? Is it something I did? Sometimes these disorders are caused by genetics, and they might appear just on one parent's side, the mother or the father. So imagine knowing that it came from you. Or some even express a guilt around more of a spiritual angle, like, did I do something? Is this a result of some sin of mine? Is God punishing me? So again, the families I spoke with, they've been through all of this, and they've come out the other side, and I have no doubt that their faith in God is a huge reason why they are some of the most amazing families you'll meet. They've told me about experiencing other families in support groups and other settings, and seeing a lot of parents who are still bitter, who are still angry, who are still going through life with this woe is me attitude, and still asking that question, why? But the families I met with, they have this amazing resilience, even a contentment with their circumstances, which is pretty incredible. One parent even said to me, everyone has their thing to deal with, and this is ours. That's pretty amazing to have that perspective, and it led me to realize something, that these families, they're exactly like every other family, and at the same time, nothing like every other family. And by that I mean, we all have common experiences in family life and in parenting. We all go through some of the similar challenges and failures and doubts, and we all fall short of that family ideal in some way. One article I read on this topic framed it this way. It says, the whole human race lives with the reality of imperfection. Everyone experiences less than ideal conditions. We are all broken in some way. The handicaps we live with are simply a matter of degree. Now, for these families, that degree is far more significant than most, for sure. Every challenge as a parent, as a sibling, as a family member, is amplified for them. But the point is that disabilities, along with any type of human pain or suffering we experience, are symptoms of living in a fallen world. Imperfection and pain are the natural result of a humanity that has rebelled against God. pain, suffering, these things, they all entered in the world when Adam and Eve decided they didn't need their Creator to sustain them, that they could somehow do this themselves. So whether or not you live with or know somebody with disabilities or special needs, this is our common ground for what we're talking about this morning. So again, I think the most important thing I can do for you is give you an understanding of the reality of daily life and the things that these families cope with when they're dealing with special needs and disabilities. And so the approach I want to take with this is I want to use some familiar language. So I'm going to put some common statements up here on the screen that you would probably hear the average parent say, that we all understand. But I want us to kind of use those to springboard off and understand how much more significant these beliefs and values are for these families. I want you to take what you already know for yourselves and use that to try to understand and empathize with these families who go through something that you've never experienced. So here's the first thing. Okay, of course, every parent loves their child no matter what and would say, I love my child unconditionally. Right? And the same is true for parents with children with disabilities or special needs. Now, as I say that, I realize this may seem obvious to you. Of course, they love their kids. But there are people who don't understand how parents can love these children unconditionally like the average family would. One family told me that they often get asked by people, why do you do it? Why don't you just put them in an institution where they can be cared for there? Why do you go through the pain and the difficulty of caring for this child yourself? And while many parents have that unconditional love, and certainly the ones I spoke with do, there are many who find that an immense and insurmountable struggle. They can't do it. There are many kids who are institutionalized and who don't even get visits from their families, and it's sad. Now, fortunately, again, this is not the case with the parents I spoke with. They all expressed this deep, amazing love for their kids. They said things like, all children are a gift. My child is here to help me to question what is the purpose of life. He pushes your limits, but we wouldn't have it any other way. We believe we received this child because God knew we could handle it. And of course, the simplest is, my child is perfect. And I'll be completely kind of honest. When I heard some of these responses, when I heard people say, my child is perfect, I thought, wow, that's so difficult. How can you say that with everything you're dealing with and what's going on? But as I got to know them better, I started to understand. And so here's one example. For those kids who are on the autism spectrum, particularly the ones I spoke with who are nonverbal, they cannot communicate, they exhibit behaviors that are unusual to us. They can seem disruptive and shocking. But one family told me, you have to understand there's absolutely no malicious intent in their actions. In fact, it's almost impossible. They're perfect in a way because they're innocent. They're mostly incapable of sin in a way. When they can't communicate like we do, they don't have the capacity to lie and manipulate the way we do. And they simply live with this freedom that a lot of us can't do. We don't live that way. Or another way I would say these kids are perfect and special is that for all these families, I heard incredible testimonies and stories about how even in spite of their disability and their sickness, they are bringing people together wherever they're at. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Now, of course, with this unconditional love, again, if you're a parent, you're going to get this, there comes a lot of heartache too. Every parent knows you worry about your kid. But imagine having to go through this. Imagine knowing your child is vulnerable to the degree that they have no concept of stranger danger and they would easily walk off with anybody. Imagine your child will never be able to learn how to swim, but they love and are attracted to any body of water they see. Imagine constant medical needs that need your attention to avoid catastrophe at all times. Anything could happen at any moment. Or just think about the social impacts. Think about the heartbreak of knowing your kid has never been invited to a birthday party. Think about your child being bullied simply because of the way they look or the way they behave. And maybe they know it, or maybe they don't. Maybe they develop insecurities and body image issues because of that. Imagine going through life, people whispering behind your back about your child, rather than just asking you up front about what's going on. Imagine being asked to leave a store or a public space because somebody thinks your child is disruptive. You know, one parent, while she expressed her sincere conviction that her child is perfect, she also opened up and was vulnerable to say that, you know, there are times you see your neighbor's kid and all of a sudden you're hit with the fact of how farther advanced they are, or how different their life is. And that's a hard thing to take, to see another child functioning at a higher level than your own. And then, of course, there are fears about the future. One parent said, "Releasing my child into the world absolutely frightens me." Another family said that their biggest concern is that their vulnerable child will likely outlive them. So who's going to look after them when they're gone? If he doesn't have a family caregiver, who's to say he won't become a victim of neglect or abuse? And another family dealing with a life-threatening condition simply said, you know what, to watch our kid go through what they have to go through, surgery after surgery, you just watch your kid be forced to grow up in ways that other kids don't have to. Now, another thing parents often say, which couldn't be more true than it is for the families I talk to, is, I would do anything for my kids, right? But for these families, this is absolutely true. A lot of us might say that, but for them, this is not lip service. You know, they'll humbly say things like, you know, it tests you a lot. But listen to what some of these families do. Okay, so firstly, there's a massive impact on time. They have to go to different therapies. They have to drive from place to place, appointment to appointment. These things are not always close together. They're not always close to home. They go to specialized parenting classes. They go to support groups. These families have to constantly fight for their children. Support systems can be extremely limited, and they can be difficult to navigate. There are waiting lists that you get put on, and there may be no hope of getting through that and getting what you need. Now, you parents who have, maybe at some point you've had to interject and engage with the school system, right? You've got to speak up on behalf of your kid to get something that they need, or to defend them, or to help them. Imagine having a nonverbal child and you constantly have to be their voice. You constantly have to advocate for them. These families have to make significant sacrifices, not just of time, but also finances to pay for therapies. They have to kind of give up any hopes they have for their future. One mother said, retirement looks very different for us than anybody else. Or, just the simple convenience things. Imagine a busy, crazy morning, you're heading out the door, you can't just throw a granola bar in the lunchbox, because your child is on a special diet, so you have to cook from scratch all weekend long to prepare for the week ahead. In addition to all the activity and all the doing that goes into parenting, you probably know that parenting also takes a mental and physical toll. So people will often say, being a parent is the hardest job in the world. And I agree, but again, take whatever you know of that and amplify it. Imagine living life with your mind always on high alert. For your vulnerable child, you have to always be aware, protecting their safety, caring for their needs, and ensuring that they, again, are safe. Or in social settings, managing behaviors, or worrying that your child is fitting in and not being bullied or made fun of. And if you think you don't get out much as parents, and I'm in that boat, imagine just not even having the capacity for friends and for a social life. You just don't have it in you at the end of the day. Imagine you can't go on a family vacation together because your child doesn't travel that easily, or it'd be too difficult to be away from home. Discipline. Discipline's another factor. Discipline for children with special needs can be extra demanding, especially if they have comprehension issues or inabilities to communicate. They might require more exhaustive means to teach them the basics. You might have to put them through a special program, or you yourself have to teach and reteach simple concepts like the word no, or what it means to wait for something. You have to treat every excursion out of the house as a teaching opportunity, every grocery trip, every walk in the park. How many of you ever feel like you don't know what you're doing as a parent? Me totally, right? With special needs, you're even more lost. Parents described themselves feeling like a failure for their child with special needs, but also for their other children. They feel like they're letting them both down at the same time. And then one family, they spoke to how much impact and toll it takes on them, the stress on them physically. They experience their own physical pains, their own illnesses, their own weight gain and issues because they're so stressed out. Oh, and don't forget about work. Let's throw work into the mix. Between work and home life, you have no downtime, ever. No downtime. You're always thinking about your child even when you're at work. And then you come home and you deal with that. One mother told me about the early years of her child's life, the child would be awake for 72 hours straight, and she had to monitor that. Or just think about the emotional toll of seeing your child in an ICU time and time again, bandaged, tubes, hooked up to machines over and over. Let's move into some other things. A lot of parents will give you advice that you need to carve out time for your marriage, and that's good advice. Good advice a lot of parents will give. But what do you do when you can't just hire any babysitter? What do you do when you just don't have time or energy for each other? On top of that, just lack of time and energy, think about the fact that special needs parents have very unique challenges most of us don't have. They might process their situation emotionally very differently from each other. One might be angry, one might be accepting, one might be bitter, one might have questions. And it's essential that they be on the same page as to how to approach the disability, how to parent the child. How many arguments have you had about how to parent your child? And so sadly, as a result, many marriages fail. There are a lot of single parents out there doing this alone. Now, one last little slice of reality I want to give you, and that's about siblings. Going into this, I really didn't even think that much about siblings, but then I quickly realized what a huge impact this was on the family. Understandably, the special needs child is going to demand most of the attention. At the time of diagnosis and onward, the parent's whole focus, well, not whole focus, but the predominant focus is going to shift to that child. And most of the siblings in the families I spoke to, they were very understanding, and some of them are amazing kids who are helping and supporting, but that doesn't make it easy, right? They still lack a lot of the attention and time that they deserve from their parents. On top of that, they get to see their other friends who have very normal sibling relationships, ones that look nothing like theirs. They become victims of bullying themselves at school because of their sibling, or at least they have to be on the lookout to make sure their sibling is not getting bullied themselves. Right? So by all accounts, not a typical child. So I know that's a lot to take in, and that's only the tip of the iceberg. I've only scratched the surface of what people told me in these interviews. But right now, let's take all that and shift gears a bit, and let's see what Scripture has to say. So if you're like me, if you're going to kind of open up the Bible and say, okay, what will the Bible say on this topic? You're probably going to go to the Gospels, go to Jesus, because, hey, he healed a lot of people, right? So that's a good place to start. And yes, these stories are great. They show the character of God. They show a God who can heal. They show a God with compassion for the needs of the hurting and the helpless. And these stories give us faith, and they give us hope. I believe God can and does heal people. But at the same time, the healings that Jesus performed might be an unhelpful place to start. You know, what Jesus was doing in these times, part of it was to demonstrate God's character, and part of it was to reveal to the world who he was, the Son of God. And so he was working miracles, and miracles by definition are supernatural. They're beyond natural. They are not the norm. And while we believe God has and still can heal people, and we can and should pray for that, we also know that's not the common or expected experience. I'm sure there was a lot of people during Jesus' ministry who didn't get healed, who wanted to be healed. He was ministering to crowds of people and traveling from town to town. He could never get to them all. And so, as I said, the families that I interviewed, they're some of the most faithful people I've met. And some of them told me about how they prayed and begged God to take this condition away. One family told me that their child at a young age came to him and said, "Dad, your faith must not be very strong." And he said, "Why?" And the child said, "Well, because I'm not healed." So the reason I think that Jesus' healings are maybe an unhelpful place to start, maybe even a slightly dangerous place to start, is because we can jump to the wrong conclusions easily if we just take those in isolation. We can assume that people just need enough faith to be healed. Or we can jump to the conclusion that, well, maybe God is punishing them for some sin, or there's some reason why he's inflicting this on them. But if you read further, you can see the disciples made that same mistake. As Jesus was going out healing people, there was one moment he was with a blind man, and the disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" But Jesus replied and said, "Neither this man or his parents sinned. But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him." So I think instead, if we're going to look for answers in the Bible, we need to broaden our search and look at bigger principles of what God is like, what he might be doing in humanity, and particularly in our suffering. So there's three things I want us to see. The first thing is that God redeems all types of suffering. The first thing we have to do is deal with the problem of pain. That is, why does God allow us to suffer? Why does he let these things happen? And firstly, we come back to the fact that, we live in a fallen world. God does not necessarily inflict these things on us, but they are the natural consequences of a once perfect world that has become separated from its creator. But at the same time, God can use our afflictions for good. Paul writes that God uses suffering and hardship to develop our character. In Romans 5, he said, "We can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they help us develop endurance. And endurance helps us develop strength of character, and character strengthens our confident hope of salvation. And this hope will not lead to disappointment, for we know how dearly God loves us, because he has given us the Holy Spirit to fill our hearts with love." So you'll notice there that he's saying God strengthens us through our trials so that we can become confident in our hope of salvation. Confident that God is going to save us, that he loves us enough to do that, and that we can trust and depend on him for that salvation. And so I think probably the most significant part of our character that is developed through adversity is our dependence on God, to trust in him. Paul experienced this firsthand. He had some unknown affliction that he refers to as the thorn in his side. It was some kind of illness or disability or something. And he prayed for it again and again for it to be taken away. But even Paul, the Apostle Paul, didn't receive the healing he was asking for. And he explains it this way. He says, "So to keep me from becoming proud, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me and keep me from becoming proud." So he says it's from Satan, it's from sin, it's from that fallen world. He says 3 different times, I begged the Lord to take it away. And each time he said, "My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness." And Paul says, "So now I'm glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong." So you see what happens? God uses this ailment to keep Paul from becoming too proud, from becoming too independent, to teach him he still needs to trust in God's grace. That God's grace is all that he needs. And there's that interesting message from God there. He says to Paul, "My power works best in weakness." I think God's power, his great love and compassion for us, they're best demonstrated, of course, through the people who need him the most. And that leads me to the second point of Scripture. God often chooses to use the people who need him most. He demonstrates who he is and what he can do through those people. C.S. Lewis writes that the one way God gets our attention and turns us toward God is through our pain and difficulty. He says, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. It's pretty cool. When we are so blind and deaf to what God is doing, he shouts in our pain to get our attention. And Paul expresses similar thoughts, that God gets our attention by working in ways and in the lives of people who we would least expect. Here's what he says. He says, God chose things the world considers foolish in order to shame those who think they are wise. And he chose things that are powerless to shame those who are powerful. God chose things despised by the world, things counted as nothing at all, and used them to bring to nothing what the world considers important. As a result, no one can ever boast in the presence of God. All throughout the Bible, we see this pattern of God using people who we would least expect, whether it's the weak, the poor, or the disadvantaged. He uses those people to accomplish his purposes because it shows what he is doing and what he can do and how we ought to depend on him. Just think of some of the examples, right? Who does he choose to first speak on his behalf to this chosen nation of Israel, who he wanted to be his people? He picks Moses. Moses, who a lot of people think probably had some sort of speech impediment or disability, because he uses this curious phrase that he is heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue, so he doesn't want to do it. And think about kind of the history of Israel, God never chooses the great warrior, but instead he favors the weak shepherd, like David, the little kid, right? Jesus comes along. He doesn't minister exclusively to the religious crowd. He spends most of his time, with the lepers, with the sick, with the poor. And if you could just think about Jesus himself, God is coming himself to save the world, to bring salvation to us. And how does he do it? Well, he comes to earth by limiting his own power and ability to become a human, to be born into poverty as a child. And so this idea that God chooses to work his purposes through what we might consider as weaknesses, we see it in Scripture, but also it came out in these interviews I did. A lot of the families spoke to this. They all believe that God has a plan for their child. And God has a reason for putting that child in their lives. One mother said her child is not a burden, but an assignment from God. And she gave me this really cool picture. She said she imagined her child as a rope, and she's holding on to him at one end, and God is at the other. And as she journeys with her child and holds on to him, he is drawing her to God. That's pretty amazing. Funny enough, another common thread I heard, it was kind of interesting. Two families said almost the same thing word for word. They said that before their child was born, one of their prayers had been prayers for patience. But they admitted, I pray for patience. God's not just going to make me patient. God's going to give me opportunities to develop patience. And that's where my child comes in. All these families also agree that their children make the people around them better. That they grow and develop everyone around them. They have the ability to teach and instill in you things that you wouldn't achieve or come to on your own. Things like patience, things like tolerance, compromise, understanding. They force people outside their comfort zones. One child has a hospital ministry, not officially, but it's there simply because the amount of time they spend in surgeries and hospital wards. And relating and caring for the other kids that are there. And some of these parents said, just sometimes these kids make people's day to see them smile and interact. And so the third thing I want you to see here out of Scripture is that God cares for the least, but he also calls us to love the least as well. Right? We all know God's character is defined by compassion and love for his children, and he instructs us to model ourselves after him. To love those who society views as, untouchable or unknowable or unlovable or just, the outcast. And there are so many examples of this in the Bible we could look at, but I'll just focus on one this morning from the words of Jesus. Because remember, Jesus came, he died for us, he brought us salvation, yes, but the other thing he did was gave us a life and a model to follow. He taught us how we ought to live. And he said, when you put on a luncheon or a banquet, don't invite your friends, brothers, relatives, and rich neighbors, for they will invite you back. And that will be your only reward. Instead, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Then at the resurrection of the righteous, God will reward you for inviting those who could not repay you. Just like we all need God's love, and we can never repay him for his grace, his forgiveness, we ought to then pass that on to others. We ought to love those who need it the most and who can never repay us. Okay, what I want to do to kind of close here now is I want to add all this up. We've talked about the reality of what families we know go through. And we've looked at some things, some big principles in the Bible. So now let's ask what God is really doing in all this and what we can do to come alongside that. So we're going to talk about how God redeems these families. And so I'm going to approach this from two angles. I want to start with what these families need from all of you. From our church family. And what they need, I think, from what I heard, is that they need to be known and to belong. I asked each of these families, what can your church family do to encourage and support you? One parent said, just being understood is huge. We need to understand. We need to understand the daily challenges these families go through, which I hope we've shed a little light on today. We need to understand their children. We need to know what their disabilities are. We need to know how they affect their behavior, their emotional state, their comprehension, their faith. Because with proper understanding, then we can avoid a lot of the judgment and discrimination that goes on in the world even today. And and we can get ourselves out of our own discomfort. One mother put it this way. She said, "We all have our pain and struggles, so just take the time to slow down and be aware of each other's humanity." It's good advice for all of us. Another family told me what they need most is simply to have the peace of mind to know that their children can be brought, accepted, and included. They don't get that everywhere. So the next thing I think we need is to help them be accepted, but more importantly, to belong. And acceptance and belonging can be two kind of different things. Theologian John Swinton puts it this way. He said, "The problem we have with society is a real emphasis, and quite a right emphasis, on inclusion. I think at one level that's fine. However, inclusion is simply not enough. To include people in society is just to have them there. To belong, you have to be missed. There's something really, really important about that. People need to long for you, to want you to be there. When you're not there, they should go looking for you." And now that's a strong challenge, and maybe a tall order for some of us, but let me help with a little advice that some of the families gave to me. So children who are, mentally or developmentally or socially challenged in some way, they might not be able to make and maintain a friendship. They need someone like you to just come alongside them and just be their friend. Or your children to come alongside them and just be their friend. And you might, and your children might find it uncomfortable to try to build a relationship with a special needs child because you might not receive back the response or emotion you expect. It might not be a two-way relationship like you're used to. You might not be able to bond through common means like speech or emotive expression or, even simple physical contact like a high five. But put in the work to get to know them and get over your discomfort. Also, another family told me just to keep in mind that the little things can make a big difference. A prayer, a text, a note. Because these are the things that are going to show them they belong and that we care enough to miss them. And they said, don't be shy about it either. If you're praying for us, tell us. And they said, you may not even know when's the right time to reach out. Doesn't matter. When it's on your heart, just do it. And lastly, if you're really, really uncomfortable interacting with a child with special needs or disabilities, then focus on the sibling, because they need you just as much. Okay, so now, this is the part you may not expect, is what you need from these families. You need to be challenged to learn and to grow. Families dealing with these disabilities, these special needs, they have something a lot of us lack, an immense dependence on God. Joni Eareckson Tada is a woman who suffered a diving accident as a teenager, and she became a quadriplegic. And she's written a lot. Here's one thing she said. She said, the weaker I was in that thing, meaning her wheelchair, the harder I leaned on you, God. And the harder I leaned on you, the stronger I discovered you to be. It never would have happened had you not given me the bruising of the blessing of that wheelchair. It's pretty cool. When you read the Bible helps us to understand absolute dependence on God through this lens of the poor, the outcast, and the disadvantaged. Because we see, again, God's immense compassion and care for them. But today, we live in a very privileged and affluent culture, and so we're not really, probably most of us are not really seeing God through that same lens. We don't experience that. We have so much convenience, so much comfort, so much wealth. So people living with disabilities, they might very well be the closest any of us ever get to knowing someone who truly depends on God. As I spoke with these families, I discovered what a huge factor prayer was in their lives. They have been forced to lean on faith and forced to be vulnerable with God and with others. One mother said, for everything I do, I pray. Every little moment of the day, every little activity, every outing you make, I pray. She says, I pray day and night for strength, wisdom, and courage. Those three things. And even though these families, they pray and they have not experienced some miraculous healing, they've still seen some miraculous answers to prayer, and I heard some cool stories that you should talk to them about. I've heard about children being protected after running out into a crazy busy street where it was impossible not to get hit, and it was like time stood still. I've heard about families receiving a random gift in the form of a check for the exact amount they needed for an expensive new treatment. I've heard about a Renew group who was praying that a child before surgery would not have to have her head shaved. The parents didn't think that prayer could even come true. But for some reason, the surgeon decided to break protocol because he couldn't bring himself to shave her head. She kept her hair. I heard about a child lost at the beach, a child who could have easily run into that water and drowned, and was found sitting safely with an elderly couple who 1 minute were there and the next were gone. So I think these families have a lot to teach us. Another thing Joni Eareckson taught us is maybe the truly handicapped people are the ones who don't need God as much. So my advice to you families who are living with special needs and disabilities: we want to include you. We want you to belong. So please don't be shy. Bring your families, be a full and complete part of this community to whatever extent you're able. Because we know not everything is conducive to your family. But come when you can, be there when you can. And yes, I will admit, for a lot of us, we don't share your same experiences, and we do feel uncomfortable at times. We are awkward and we are fumbling. So help us overcome that discomfort. Be open, tell us what you've been through. Tell us how we can come alongside you. Often we're unsure how to support you, how to encourage you. What does that even look like? Because we don't know what's best. And a lot of times we just don't want to be an extra imposition on you. But more than all of that, you have something really special to contribute to our church family. You know, a lot of us maybe sometimes think we ought to be ministering to you, but you can minister and disciple all of us. We have so much to learn from you. We want to hear your stories of how God is working in your family. We want to learn your dependence on God, your commitment to prayer, your contentment, your humility, your unshakable joy in spite of difficult circumstances. So teach us what you've learned, how to pray, how to trust God in hard times, how to find joy and peace in all that. And I hate that I have to keep kind of using these words, you and us, because we're all family here in Christ, and that's the point of this series. We have so much in common in spite of our different circumstances and experience. So my prayer for this morning and my prayer for this whole series is that we would all learn through this how to live together more as a family and as God intended that family to be. Let me pray for us.